Hello and welcome to the House of College Hoops on houseenterprise.com. I'm Sam Basil, head of content at House Enterprise, and I'm joined by 1/3 of the Everything College Basketball podcast, Trevor Everett, and a frequent co-host of the Road to the Garden podcast, Michael DeRosa. And guys, we are 6 days away from tip-off of the 2024-25 NCAA basketball season. And we're here to talk hoops, and we're also here to talk about the most crucial tool for fans, coaches, analysts, and everyone who loves college basketball to navigate this upcoming season, and that is the 2024-25 Everything College Basketball Magazine, presented by the House of College Hoops. Guys, this magazine is an ultimate labor of love. We worked on this all summer. We had, plenty of contributors researching, writing. We had a couple people interviewing coaches. And then, we spent the last 2 months, the three of us and a few more folks, editing, designing, putting everything all together for this product. It's something we're super proud of and something we hope you can enjoy. Throughout the show, you'll see a link where you can order a copy for yourself as well. It's going to be on the blog at house-enterprise.com. But guys, we're here. The magazine's out. The season is on the way. How are you guys feeling?
I just want to, first of all, I'll say that I'm actually not 1/3 anymore. I'm officially 1/4 because the guy that forwarded the whole magazine is, of course, an analyst now with ECB. So Coach Scott Parra, we're very happy to have him on for his first official show this weekend. That was really cool, having a coach just talk like an analyst and a fan. Like, it was the first time I've ever been that close to it. You hear about coaches on TV, but I'm just I'm always going to find a way to plug the magazine, and he's literally the second page. His whole forward there, which is great, and so I'm really excited for people to get to read that. But it's been a lot of fun. It's weird because we had this lull, right? Like, regardless of my vacation time, like right after we were done with this, I think we all deserved one. But October 18th happened, and I'm like, all right, it's done. And then I'm like, well, the season's still 3 weeks away. And so it was kind of nice to kind of breathe. Last year, it was not that way. It was the magazine's out, and the season's also out. And here we go. And it's really nice to actually kind of absorb it, take time and read it, and really hit the teams like in the SWAC that Michael spent so much time on and throwing us on, to actually get to read those. It's really nice to kind of absorb that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It was quite a bit of work, but it was very enjoyable. Just once everything finally got done, I felt like I finished everything like 15 times. And it's like, oh yeah, there's this part. It's like, yeah, duh. I should have known that. But it was good to finally get it done. Labor of love, but I really think it's worth it. It's what? I mean, we're charging nothing for the amount of work that I went into it, all things considered. So I can keep these lights on. That'd be nice. But yeah, Labor of Love was a ton of fun, and was happy to do it. But I also noticed you guys both have hats, so I'm gonna have to get a hat now.
Of course, that's half the importance of half the key to running a successful podcast is the hat you wear during.
That is after what happened Sunday. That hat should be on your head forever. Like it, yeah. Even though it should have a skin on it, a red skin on it. But.
Well, it should have a commander on it, but
yeah. What is with that? I know we're about to talk about the magazine. I'm sorry to derail this 4 minutes in. What is with the fact that like it'd be like a college basketball school of like large prominence, like
Dan
Duke
not
using a devil. Imagine Duke not using a devil ever.
Dan Snyder had a military fetish. That's why they're called the Commanders.
Well, that's no longer a problem now. So. The team name is a problem, but yeah, I just always thought that was fascinating. But congratulations on having an incredible quarterback and and a winning team in year one. It's crazy.
Shout out to Krista Dinga, a contributor to the ECB magazine, as well as another co-host of Road to the Garden. Long live the football team. I gotta agree with you, Chris. I was a fan of the football team years. Now let's get into some actual, college basketball. Guys, let's talk about, kind of our process in writing this magazine. Trevor, if you want to kind of get into the history of this magazine, because this is really the first year that I was involved on the magazine, which I have been incredibly thankful for. But, I mean, you guys have been doing this for the past couple of years now. Could you talk about, where the idea kind of started and then kind of how you feel like that first magazine that came out compares to the one that we put out last week?
So Yeah, really, the first couple of years, obviously, I was involved the second year. I guess it's technically the third annual, and I wish we could have Phil on here to talk about it. But at the end of the day, the first year was I really don't know anything about the first year. I read it. I got a copy of it after I joined the team, but it was an incredible piece of work. Very simple. Reminded me of the Blue Ribbon Yearbook a little bit, where people have been buying that for what 30 years, and it's black and white text and a couple of pictures on the cover. That's incredible. It really is as simple as that, and people eat it up. And so the first year was really, it was very simple, and people really did enjoy it. The second year, to see Division One coaches who we didn't have an interaction with buying it out of their own pocket, and year one to year two to see that kind of growth, I mean, I was blown away. Less people working on it, so it was interesting ordeal. I think that was my biggest takeaway from year one to year two to year three, I guess in this case, was just bringing in extra people that are really good at what they do. It really, really helped. I mean, it was like just that I wish people could just see like the group text that we had where we were like, okay, is this what we're doing with this? Next decision, move on, boom, 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 boom. We only met, like, it's crazy to think we only met twice. Like, people probably don't believe that, but like we only truly sat down and talked about it like twice, because we were just able to just say, hey, this is what we're working on. This is what you're doing. This is what you're doing. You have 2 months to write everything and research it and interview coaches and rosters and this and that. Keep up with who has, it was down to the wire, right? The last team put their official roster on literally the day before we released it, and we like updated it and moved on. Shout out to, I don't remember, Jacksonville, I think is who it was. And so shout out to Jacksonville, right? They got it in there and we had the official, we knew what we were going off of.
Tony Bennett quit the day before.
Yeah, like that's right. That's true. It was the day before, wasn't it? Yeah. And trying to figure out who the coach was and it was just a lot. I mean, I was getting texted it was one guy, and then we were assuming it was another, and it was a lot. It was a lot. And I'm really excited to just people to be able to read it, even if it doesn't sell 2,000 copies like we'd all probably hope. It's just something that I'm always going to be proud of. It's something I'm always going to look back on and say, like, this is how hard, even though we can all take it as like a personal resume piece, there were so many hands involved in it that like we're all going to get something out of this, whether it's just proud of what we worked on or what. That's what I'm going to take away from it.
Absolutely. Michael, any thoughts on just again getting to work on the magazine this year?
Yeah, just finishing off what Trevor kind of ended off with. It's just kind of one of those things where it's like you prove to yourself that you can do it. We did it. We wrote a lot of words about a lot of teams. A lot of research went into it. I don't know what your guys' process was like, but it was like I went through, watched as many clips of some of these guys as I could. There were many huddle clips that I found that had one view. They now had two because I viewed it. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Getting into the actual content of our magazine. So when you head over to the link at the bottom ticker here, you'll find, up first our excellent staff page with great photos of everybody that contributed to the magazine, as well as the forward from the newest member of the ECB podcast, Coach Scott Pera. And then when you get into the actual conference breakdowns, up first, you'll see our national preseason awards ballot. This was voted on by the editors of the magazine. And, I don't want to spoil too much, but I think it's okay if we talk about, our 2025 national awards. So preseason player of the year, Mark Sears from Alabama. Coach of the year, Mark Few from Gonzaga. Defensive player of the year, Ryan Kalkbrenner from Creighton. And our freshman of the year, Cooper Flagg from Duke. I want to start off with Mark Sears. Obviously, Alabama had a really big year. They made the Final Four. How do they capitalize on that? And how does a guy like Mark Sears kind of help Alabama stay at this, upper echelon of college basketball heading into 2024-25?
I'll just be short and sweet for Mike's sake, because I've been talking too much already. But I think that the answer is in your question. It's like, how do they capitalize? And they capitalize the fact that they brought back the potential national player of the year. I mean, that's as simple as I think it is for Alabama, because obviously we know the center spot, they improved there drastically in the offseason, where they won't have to play Nelson there as much anymore, which is, I think that killed them in stretches in the tournament. Even though they were able to pull those games off, they were able to just able to offensively kill everybody they played. So it was one of those things you're like, cool, but there's a glaring weakness every time that they had to play him at the 5. Not that he was a bad 5. I'm not saying that at all, but that was just something that teams could exploit. Now they don't have to do that. And so if Mark Sears is healthy, I know RJ Davis is way more experienced. I know Caleb Love, same thing. And we're one of the few places that had Love on the first team, it seems like. And, either way, those are the three best guards in college basketball. I just think it's that simple. When you have any of those three guys, you're going to be competing for a national championship, and all three of those teams probably will. And when you have Mark Sears, if he's healthy, I mean, the team that their floor is 25 wins if he's healthy. I mean, it's just like that's the crazy thing of what kind of gravitas he has. Obviously, I'm not going too in depth. I wish Josh was here to go even more in depth into the SEC and Alabama, but there's people voting them not in the top three in polls that we've posted this week. The ECB 25 just went out. Other polls that I participated in. It surprises me, regardless of people's affiliation with places. It just really surprises me if you don't have them as a top 2 team. I'd love to hear the argument, but
absolutely. And then as we're looking in, another great feature of the magazine is our top 50 players from Screen the Screener. As you're scrolling through the magazine, we've got them in a 50-1 countdown. Mark Sears is in the top 10. I don't want to say exactly where he is, but he is pretty close to our preseason National Freshman of the Year, that being Cooper Flagg. Trevor, I know you didn't want to get into too much detail about the SEC while we're waiting for Josh, but you wrote the ACC portion of this magazine. Obviously, you've got the Wolfpack hat on right now. Your Wolfpack are the reigning ACC champs, Final Four contenders. Could you talk about, just first of all, talk about, just closing thoughts on last year's run, and then what you kind of expect out of the Wolfpack this year?
Before Trevor goes, I actually edited his part in the ACC. He said the Wolfpack are guaranteed to repeat. Those are his exact words.
I'm going to go find that so I can dispute that fact. No. So it's funny because if we rewinded this to 12 months ago, and I swear, don't ask me another question for 10 minutes, please. Let Michael talk about the Big East. But so the thing that I laid it out with Josh and Peyton last year was, okay, this is a team that has Sweet 16 potential. And I kind of left it at that. I was like, this is a team that I think can be really, really good if they get into the tournament. Did I see that in any way? I predict them to finish top 4 like I did this year. I think I have 4 or 5. I can't remember. Either way, realistic expectations. Now, after making a Final Four, for crying out loud. And so at the end of the day, if you told me last year, I think Stephen Bagel, who we'll have on later, said it best. He's like, you were right, but how you got there was wrong. I was like, you're 100% correct. They made a Final Four first time since my mom was 13. I think the last time they made the Final Four, right? To give people context of how long the delineation of the family has kind of been around that team. But it's one of those things you're like, okay, but to put the bow on it is you win, but how do you capitalize on it? It's the same question you have for Alabama. How do you go, okay, this guy was probably fired, I don't know, 7 months ago. He was probably, on March 16th, he was probably unemployed. That Kevin Keatts, that is. And now to bring in a former top, 8 recruit and Brandon Huntley Hatfield, I think he was a top 8 player out of high school, or top 10. He was incredible out of high school. To get that guy from Louisville after probably the 2 worst seasons he'll ever play in his basketball career, not him, but just the situation, to come in and play in a system he'll be really excited to play in and play for. I'll say it like I've said to everyone else on every podcast or every text or conversation is they don't have a DJ Burns who completely changed their entire style and their entire offense. When they couldn't be Kevin Keatts system successful, they had him and Horn to go to and say, this is what we're going to do differently. They don't have that anymore. If you want to say it's BAHH, but I think he's going to be the reason this team goes as far as they did last year. If they're going to, whether I think that or not, that's not the point. The point is this team is actually built to win in a Kevin Keatts offense. Hasn't had a team that's actually fully built from top to bottom to be a team that, and I thought last year's team was that. Again, coincidentally wrong in the long run. But this team is built to win the way he likes to win, whether that is a winning formula. We've had 7 years to figure that out. And if this team doesn't win, then I just think last year was a fluke probably. But that probably speaks more to Burns and Horn, who I absolutely adore, and I'll never forget the rest of my life. But I think this team's built top to bottom. They've got a 20-point per game scorer, Marcus Hill from Bowling Green. Dontrez Styles, love him or hate him, he's had an interesting college career wherever stop he's been so far. I think he's an incredible player that just hasn't been fully unlocked. And then you look up and down the roster. If they can figure out one of the talented freshmen with Hurd and McNeil and Parker, if one of those guys can figure it out, I don't know. This team's they're going to be really, really good, and I think a lot of people are undervaluing him. I've seen him anywhere from 4. I for the first time I saw someone had him 4 yesterday. and like someone I truly trust in their opinion. And then I've seen as low as 12. I don't think it's that big of a disparity because that's really where they finished last year. I don't think they're worse than last year. I don't think they're much better either. So I'm fine with whatever people think, but I think they're a top 5 team in the ACC.
Yeah, absolutely. That top 5 in the ACC is going to be very contentious, especially with Duke and Cooper Flagg. I know we're going to get to the Big East in just a sec, but I just wanted to get your just quick preliminary thoughts on Cooper Flagg's freshman season.
He's so good at basketball. Oh my God. He's better defensively than offensively is the thing. Like, he is in passing lanes, very active. He is an excellent shot blocker. I remember watching him at Beach Jam. It was him and just a bunch of his buddies at Maine United. They got all the way to the final, and the only team that could beat him were the Boozer Bros, who also won again this year. So, like,
who also went to Duke.
Yeah, those two. Very good at basketball, the Boozer
really
Bros.
Ridiculous statement, by the way.
Yeah. And they had like a couple other pros on that team too. Future pros, at least. They're not pros now, obviously. They're high school kids. But Flagg is awesome, man. He's going to be so much fun. He's probably the best college player with the highest expectations we've seen maybe since Zion. But Zion didn't really have that expectation. Maybe it was RJ Barrett on that team. Kind of since that team.
Yeah.
He's special. He's so good defensively. He blocks just about everything inside. He's long. He's athletic. He has a jump shot. Flagg's going to be special, man. That Montverde team he was on was loaded. There are so many talented kids in that team that are going to put up better numbers in college than they did in their high school team, prep school, but still, which is kind of crazy.
I'll be really fast, I promise. But on Flagg, being, I don't know, an hour from Durham, I'm going out of my way if they decline. I have a credential request, fingers crossed, for Wofford. I really want to see Wofford because that was some team that we'll get to later, actually, with the SoCon with Steven. But it was a team that I just really wanted to see because I probably won't get to see a Wofford game this year. And I'm like, well, they come to Duke, and I want to see Flagg at least once in person. So then I can say I've seen an NBA All-Star probably in person. So no, but the point with Flagg, I'll say, is I think the defensive point isn't brought up enough. I mean, he's AK-47. If that's his floor, I can't even imagine the potential this kid's gonna have. But I want to go out of my way. I don't know how it's gonna happen, but I'm gonna see him play this year. What I'm really looking forward to seeing him play is he is the best player on this team, and he'll probably be the best player on almost every team he'll ever play on, except for the USA teams. We know that, right? Like, when he goes to the NBA, he'll probably be one of the best players on his team, even as a rookie. Like, we all get that. What I'm excited to see, or what I really am looking for, is there's a lot of good players on this Duke team as well. How does he fit into an offense where when he's not the most effective player on the ball, maybe he's having a really off shooting night. We haven't really seen one of those yet. Maybe he has a really bad night against a North Carolina, right? Or maybe he has a bad night against a Pittsburgh or whatever, a team that Duke struggled with in John Shire's tenure. How, other than defensively, how is he going to affect the offense? How is he going to affect the guys around him? I know he's a great playmaker, but that's something I'm really, really going to be paying attention to because he's going to have bad games. That's not being said enough. I know he's going to have probably 18, 8, 4, 2, and 1. Like, I know that's probably going to be his stat line, but he's going to have a bad night. And what he does in that bad night is going to be really interesting.
Yeah. Where do you feel like teams are going to try to exploit him? Like, what weakness do you feel like if he's going to have a bad night, like, where do you see that coming?
Make him put the ball on the floor.
Yeah, thank you. I was like, I don't know. I feel like the answer is obvious, but I don't think it's that obvious either.
Yeah, I mean, he's a great player, but every once in a while he'll have a bad night. If you're making him take tough shots, you're just doing all you can.
Yeah, absolutely. So ACC going to be really interesting. A lot of strong contenders there. Let's move into the Big East, which, Michael, you're a Big East guy through and through. You contribute a lot on the Big East portion of this magazine. UConn. 2-time reigning national champs. Doesn't really feel like they took a step back. I mean, I feel like the biggest offseason story obviously was Coach Hurley floating the idea of going to the NBA. That obviously did not come about, and he is as locked in as ever. This team still looks really good. They didn't get the preseason number 1 nod, but I mean, I feel like we all feel pretty good about the Huskies. If they have a path to a three-peat, where do you see that path being?
They don't. They're dog shit. They're not going to win a game. I'm kidding. This UConn team's really good. Path to a national title. I think that I think just kind of like the system, the culture of UConn, you just expect a guy like Solo Ball to just get so much better that all of a sudden he's just amazing. It's probably him. He's kind of like the X factor. Like you kind of know what you're getting out of Aiden Mahaney. He gave you 2 good years at St. Mary's that like you're kind of getting what you get. Kind of getting what you get out of Hassan Diar. He's been in college 17 years. Samson Johnson shoots like 97% from the field because he only dunks. So you know what you're getting out of him. Liam McNeely too. Is one of the best shooters in this freshman class. He's lights out and really high basketball IQ. He's able to put the ball on the floor a bit. Really good passer and can defend multiple positions. He was also on that Montverde team. These guys just know the roles, man. And Alex Caravan's a borderline All-American. I don't know if I had him in my first team All-American. I don't think I did, but he would be in the. If we did 3 teams, he'd probably be in there for me just because he's so solid and he's going to be on one of the best 12 to 15 best teams in the country, being very conservative. So, yeah, you just kind of know what you're getting. This UConn team's going to be really good. And if you get a breakout from Solo Ball or Ahmad Noel, who I think is the best passer in this high school class, I don't think he's going to play a ton. So, like, I don't think he'll have a huge role this year, but I also think he's the best best passer in the high school class. So, he's got to be pretty good. And if that guy's coming off the bench and playing 7 minutes a game, maybe I'm wrong here, but UConn will probably be pretty good.
Absolutely. One team I wanted to talk about, I mean, mainly just because I'm just a New York based guy, and I'm seeing them live against Fordham next week. St. John's Red Storm. Obviously, they finished 21st in Ken Palm rankings last year, but did not make the cut for the tournament. Obviously, some frustration from Coach Pitino in that regard. I felt like that last year's St. John's team was good. They were talented, but there were definitely some stops along the way where it just like they came up short. Like if you wanted to point out a couple things as to why they might have missed the tournament, I mean, one like that loss to Boston College in December at the Barclays Center was definitely one of them. And Coach Pitino has been a guy. I mean, I feel like his tenure at St. John's, and even dating back to Iona too, like the couple seasons prior, is his just real candidness in a post-game press conference, right? He's one of these guys where he's won at so many places, whether or not no matter what the NCAA official records say. But he's won. He's confident in his coaching style and his ability. So when it comes to pointing out stuff that his guys are doing wrong on the court, right? Like he's gonna flame a player in a press conference, right? He's gonna point out where certain guys might have went wrong. And it feels like at this point in his career, he's the floor is really high for a guy like Coach Pitino. You have them second in the preseason rankings. What do you feel like is the recipe for St. John's to get back to the tournament this season?
So I do apologize. I don't know if you guys noticed the colors change. I saw Trevor's eyes move. I was trying to find one of the Road to the Garden episodes. I edited together Pitino's press conference into a clip. I was going to play that, but I couldn't find it. So, yeah. But the recipe for them is very simple. Offensively, I definitely have some questions. I kind of think like 2 through 5 in the Big East. You could kind of put them in any order and you'll just be okay. Like at this point, the reason I have St. John's second, despite the offensive questions like Kadari, Davon Smith playing together, it's like you're not really getting a ton of shooting, especially if RJ Lewis is in that lineup. None of those guys are really good shooters. So it's just like, what do you do there? Who knows? Sim Wilcher, hoping kind of emerges, can be that offensive creator, shooter on the wing. On the wing, he's a guard, but you're hoping he can do that. But the thing for me, St. John's, defensively, that group defensively, if you're running a full court press with Davon Smith, Kadari Richmond, RJ Lewis, Aaron Scott, and Zuby, good luck. That is going to be a nightmare for anyone going up against them. Long, athletic, physical, all of it. They're going to cover so much space. They're bigger than you. They're faster than you. They're stronger than you. Good luck going up against that. That is just a nightmare for anyone. That if they're going to have a top 15 defense in the country, which I think they definitely can, I think they got a top 10 defense, frankly, you're going to be towards the top of the Big East. So I think their identity has to be defensively because that press, you're dealing with 3 guys who are 6'6" even going to be pressed. 6'6" or greater even, including, and if you include Zuby, he's going to be the back line. That's 4. And Davon Smith is like listed 6 foot. I mean, that dude was like a triple-double machine at Utah. I can tell you he can defend multiple positions. He's long enough, he's athletic enough, he's physical enough to do that. That pressure, good luck. It might take them some time to like get it going because it really did last year. Last year at the beginning of the year, that team was kind of ass. It'll take them some time, but they could have that thing going.
Absolutely. And then Seton Hall, obviously coming off an NIT championship. Could you just talk about, how do you feel like, I mean, there's been talks about, the relevance of the NIT in today's college basketball landscape. Obviously Coach Pitino in his first year at St. John's was like, we're not going to participate in the NIT, even though they probably could have. They wanted to shoot higher for that. So how do you build off something like an NIT championship and try to, continue that into a potential NCAA tournament run?
Yeah, I think definitely for a Seton Hall situation, it's kind of tough considering they lost just about everybody that they had on that team. Like the roster is just completely different. Like you lost Kaderi, you lost Trey Davis to Ole Miss, you lost Jaden Bediako, who graduated. That it's almost an entirely different team. So how they could build on it, you just have to keep the same identity. You know how a Shaheen Holloway team is going to play. They're going to make games ugly. They're going to fight you for every inch you take, and you're just going to have to represent that identity with a completely different group. And then you're going to have to find some guys who can score, whoever that may be. Maybe it's a Zion Harmon, who amazing high school prospect, just kind of flamed out and ended up at Bethune-Cookman. Looked okay that he's taken a step up, and you're hoping you can rekindle that guy who's playing EYBL as an 8th grader. You're hoping you can get that guy. You're hoping you can get maybe Chauncey Jenkins from Old Dominion to score. You can get a Garway Dual or Scotty Middleton breakout. You just kind of got to hope these guys hit their ceilings if they're going to build off of the NIT championship team. And Seton Hall is one of the handful of teams that you could tell was really taking the NIT seriously. Like they were showing up there. They were trying to take your lunch money.
Yeah.
Some teams definitely weren't. I can tell you I was in person for a Butler game. I don't really know what that team was doing in the NIT. It wasn't what they were doing that almost had them in the tournament. It was completely different, especially because a player, not going to name names because he did follow me on Twitter before unfollowing me, passed the ball to the wrong team. He pulled an Eric Brown. You really got to hope you keep that defensive identity. These guys develop, some of your lottery tickets hit, and find yourself on the right side of the bubble winning a whole bunch of close games if you're Seton Hall, but that seems more unlikely than likely.
Yeah, that intensity, before we get into just one last high major thing, that intensity when it comes to the NIT this past year, I really feel like part of that was like a lot of the teams that were in it were like came into it feeling like they were kind of screwed out of the NCAA tournament. I mean, I think the biggest example to point to that is Seton Hall's opponent in the final in Indiana State. So yeah, I mean, if we can get, I mean, I don't want teams to get screwed out of NCAA tournament bids, but if we can keep that intensity in the NIT, every year, I would really love that. The other high major conference,
really quick, one thing, and Michael and I can talk about this maybe I'll have him on 2 pointers or something. But the one thing about the St. John's thing, because Rick Pitino is so polarizing. Like, we know that, right? And I've told y'all this before, and you've seen it before you reposted it, right? But the single greatest piece of content I've ever created was a St. John's clip that was 1.5 minutes last year at the Charleston Classic. And his whole problem, and he said it 1,000 times, this is nothing new. He slams his hands on the table, knocks his water bottle over, and he says, we just can't read a scouting report and can't guard. And my fear with them, and this is not a counterpoint to anything Michael said, because at the end of the day, he did all the work for the Big East, and for the most part, and especially St. John's, like, he knows what he's talking about. And so my only thing I would be worried about is having that. We always do with Rick Pitino, it's always the second year. But the issue with the transfer portal and the way the turnover is like he needs a year or two with some of these guys. And that team last year that he had, I saw him multiple times in Charleston early in the season. I know they got better as the year went on. You're really, really hoping that we know he's an incredible coach. You're just really hoping that he can get this team to gel that fast. But I do think the personnel-wise, they are more built to win in the way that you described for the last 3 minutes. So, like, I think that's kind of I see both sides of it.
So I got 2 quick points I want to make before we move on. One, did you see him at the Big East Media Day when they had him on like the little show they had with Fanta and
I watched what I could, yeah.
Whoever. He said the committee did the worst job he's ever seen in his life. So that was just a funny comment from Rick to show you he's very blunt. And the other thing is he's not really recruiting high school anymore. He's just banking on transfers. Like he came out and said, yeah, we're not recruiting anyone for the 25 class. So we'll see how that works in the long run, but it should work this year.
Absolutely. The other high major conference that you covered, Michael, the Big Ten. Big Ten has kind of been, they've been great in college basketball these past couple of years. But they've, despite all these preseason expectations and then expectations even just heading into the tournament, they've come up short. I mean, I think the 2023 tournament is a notable example of that. They had 8 teams in the 2023 tournament, and not a single one made it past the Sweet 16. Obviously, Purdue kind of broke that. They made it all the way to the national championship game this year, where they lost to UConn. But even still, I think there's that lingering sentiment, like, what is this conference really doing to prepare their guys to win national championships? And now, obviously, they're the center of some of the biggest shifts in conference realignment that we've seen with the addition of Washington, Oregon, UCLA, USC. So what is the identity for this year's Big Ten? Like what can fans expect out of such a different looking conference this year?
The Big Ten's kind of an old school league to me, because most teams, Big Ten teams, when you think of like the best Big Ten teams, you're thinking of the Purdue teams that had Zach Edey. You're thinking of that Michigan team that got a 1 seed a couple years back that had Hunter Dickinson. They just kind of have these old school bigs. Old school low post bigs. It's kind of an old school league. Hunter Dickinson can definitely step out and hit a jump shot, but like it's just kind of old school in the way they kind of play, use bigs, and I kind of think last year's Purdue team was the best chance they have compared to this year, because I don't think Big Ten team's winning the title. Frankly, if you guys see the Big Ten team that I had winning the Big Ten, it wasn't. It's a pretty off the board pick. I also am looking to bet that, and the best numbers at a sportsbook that I don't yet have access to, and we don't have a sportsbook sponsor, so I could say the name, but I'm not going to because no free ads here. But yeah, it's kind of an old school league, and if you're looking for just if they're going to win a national title, I kind of think there are a whole bunch of teams that are just in that like 10 to like 17 range. There's like 3 or 4 there, and then like a gap, and then like the entire league feels like they're in that 30 to 40 range. And it's just like, who's going to break through? Who's going to be worse? I'm just guessing. I did a lot of research to make my guesses educated, but at the end of the day, it's still a guess. I'm not going to be right about everything, but I'm confident enough in my picks, and we'll leave it there.
I'll just be short and sweet on the Big Ten because I know we got a lot to get to. If it wasn't going to be the last 2 years of Zach Edey to win a national championship, then who? There's not that team that maybe I'm wrong. Michael could probably allude to this a little bit more, but like, I don't think there's a team that we just look at and go, if a Big Ten team's making the Final Four, it's this one and circling them. It's just not the case. It's just not. I will say the one that I'm keeping my very, very close eye on is, I know they have coaching, we'll call them limitations. But Indiana, I know, the preseason, I don't watch any of that stuff. I kind of keep up with what happened, but other than that, I treat it like any other preseason, any other sport. I don't look at it. Indiana, I think, is if there's a team that kind of gets through the mold and kind of takes off and is like a team we all kind of now they're the one we circle for the Final Four. I think it could be them. I know you got them third, so it's not like I'm not reaching down to the 10th spot here.
I think they have the highest ceiling. It's just coaching.
That's a good way to put it.
And outside shooting.
So who would have the biggest floor? And don't say Oregon, because I just think I understand why you have them one. I understand why most people have who has the lowest.
Purdue has the highest floor.
Really?
Braden Smith, he's really good.
I voted him 20 in my personal poll, and I just did that out of respect. It felt like I know Edey's not there, but like I almost put him outside the top 25. But I feel like
at the same time, I don't think it's a team that I had number one. Oregon. I had Oregon number one. Purdue's just kind of done it consistently. Michigan State. Do they really? I don't know. I just kind of think those 3 teams are kind of on an island, and it's like I could see how my Oregon pick goes wrong very quickly, which is if Nate Little gets hurt, and it's just like, well, GG, that one's lost. Indiana, it's just like we saw Indiana bottom out last year. That definitely can't happen again. It's Indiana. So it's just like I just kind of respect Purdue enough.
Okay. All right. Well, let's introduce a guest because we're not entirely done with the high majors yet. But if you're a fan of the Mountain West, or if you're a fan of the Big 12, which is potentially the best conference in college basketball every year right now, obviously, if you're a fan of those teams, Sorry. There's other podcasts on the House of College Hoops Network you can check out to get access to that information. But we are going to bring on here Stephen Bagel, longtime friend of myself, at least. I know he's been around these pods a few times, at least my own, at @the_MBAGELL. First of all, how are you?
I'm doing well, Trevor. I actually just finished up a one and done episode 5 minutes before jumping on here. So it's a podcast marathon for me today.
Yeah, I was actually pulling up your Twitter account. My internet wasn't being fair to me. Host of the Bird Rights podcast, one and done was what I was trying to get to. Make sure I read everything. And then also you contribute to Busting Brackets as well, among many other things. Why you're here today, of course, for people that don't know, writer for the WCC, as well as we'll start with that, but then as well as the SoCon and then the American as well. So we'll touch on some of the mid-majors as we transition to those, and we've got some other guests coming up later as well. Let's start with the WCC, right? Obviously, people consider Gonzaga, whether you call them mid-major or not, we classified the WCC because of the strength consistently at the top as a high major league this year. It gets read like that every year. It gets purchased like that every year. So the WCC is a high major league in the sake of how we did this magazine. I'll ask it like this. I know you talk to a lot of coaches, and so I want to talk about the process. You did a really interesting process over anybody else where you involved a lot more people than just, okay, I'm going to go watch all this stuff and I'm going to make my opinion, write it down. You did a lot of going out and finding out the information that maybe wasn't accessible to you being on the East Coast. So that's kind of the thing I kind of want to start with is, what was something about the process that really surprised you? First time probably doing something of this magnitude. Obviously, these conferences are not small. For the WCC specifically, is kind of where I'm starting.
I would say the thing that probably surprised me the most is just the fraternity of coaches. Like, I spoke with, I think, 5 coaches in this conference, and all of them just had so much respect, not only for obviously Coach Few and Coach Bennett, who are the 2 big names that in this conference, but just got to, they just had the utmost respect for each other. I was able to speak with Coach Smart from Pacific, who's, one of the biggest Canadian college coaches. He might be the GOAT in terms of Canada college basketball coaches. It's his first year at Pacific. I had the opportunity to speak with Coach Riley from Washington State, who obviously it's his first year. I was able to speak with Coach McConnell, who's the associate head coach of St. Mary's, who not only coached under Randy Bennett, but also played for him. So, yeah, I just think what I learned is just being able to talk to these coaches for games. Again, as you said, Trevor, as you alluded to, I am on the East Coast. I don't watch these games live as much as I would like to. So just being able to learn how a lot of these coaches are building the program with the transfer portal going on, with NIL, every coach is still getting acclimated to it. So it was just very interesting to see how some of these coaches were able to build their rosters.
One more thing I want to touch on, and then obviously I'm sure these guys have some other stuff as well, and we'll get to the American and the SoCon. Obviously, the addition of Washington State and Oregon State, I'm not going to spoil too much. The idea is that people to go buy the link. I actually included it in the description when we created the live, as well as it's on the screen, right? People can see it. So the inclusion of Washington State and Oregon State, you have them 5 and 7. So normally this conference, I'd say just going off the year before, right, would be Gonzaga, St. Mary's, Santa Clara, and San Francisco. Of just those are the 4. If they're going to get 4 teams in the tournament, it's probably those 4. I know Santa Clara is kind of an interesting team that I'd love for you to talk about a little bit in a second here. But is there still that obvious 4, or who is the team that's going to break into that? Not to say they'll get 5 teams in the tournament. They probably won't, let's be honest. But is it still the obvious 1, 2, 3, 4 draw a line? Or is there somebody that's breaking into the mold that you kind of, at least in your prediction here, that is going to make the West Coast Conference even tougher? Because I do think the league got better.
I'll agree with the sentiment that I do think the league got better. I do think those are still the top 4 because I think Santa Clara and San Fran are borderline NCAA tournament teams. It wouldn't shock me if the WCC ended up being a 4-bid league, especially with I know you guys didn't have the opportunity to talk about the Mountain West, but the Mountain West isn't going to be a 6-bid league again. So maybe the WC snags one of them, or 2 of them. I think if there were a team that were to break into that top 4, it would probably be Loyola Marymount.
Okay.
I I'm a big Javon Porter guy. I think he could still take a leap. Obviously, they have John Vide, who just transferred from UCLA. He's a guy. And just some of the returners, Will Johnston, Alec Mukviladev, Rick Izanska, excuse me. Like, they have some guys that are returning with some intriguing transfers. MJ Amy from San Jose State's another one that he had the opportunity to play elsewhere, thrived at San Jose State, and now he could, play a huge role for Loyola, for the Lions and Loyola Marymount. So I would say it's still a top 4 in terms of, I think those 4 are better than they've ever been. Gonzaga's actually my national title pick. And I'm not saying that just because I wrote this conference. I actually believe that.
It's good.
But I do think I'm a little low on St. Mary's, especially from the preseason hype they had last year. Like, last year, people were predicting St. Mary's to be a Final Four team. I don't think this team is that good. But I think this is one of the best versions of Santa Clara we've ever seen. I think this is one of the best versions of San Fran we've ever seen. And I think this is Mark Few just about one of his best shots ever at winning a national championship.
To your credit, the vibe I got from the St. Mary's preview, that was one of the ones I had a chance to edit and reread a couple times since we've been selling this, and I got the vibe that you did feel lower. Like, I think a lot of people probably are starting to lean that way, but it's so hard to doubt Bennett. Like, it's so hard. Like, I and that was kind of the vibe. Like, you basically were consistent with that the whole 500 words. It was like, okay, it's this, and this is why the reason it might be the other way. It's Randy Bennett.
Well, I mean, they are still bringing back the conference player of the year from last year and the conference offensive player of the year last year. So that is worth noting. It's just after those two, like, they need Jordan Ross. They need someone to take a lead. I just don't know who that guy's going to be. And that's the same sentiment Coach McConnell had when I spoke with him. I said, you played for him, you coached for him. If I'm lower on the St. Mary's team, why is that? He said, it doesn't matter. Coach Bennett just knows how to motivate these guys, get them to play up a bigger level than people expect them to. And he's a great motivator of his staff and of his players. And that's kind of the sentiment I tried reiterating when writing St. Mary's.
Absolutely. Stephen, you mentioned talking to a plethora of coaches, both in the WCC and then in some of the mid-majors that you wrote about that we're going to talk about in a bit. But a question I had for you, kind of talking about what I talked about with Rick Pitino before, there's guys in the WCC right now, like David Riley, right? It's his first year at Wazoo. And then you've got Mark Few, who's been the head coach at Gonzaga since 1999. Is there anything that you've noticed when you're talking to coaches, whether that's on the phone or in a press conference? Do you feel like there's a different way that coaches answer questions, as a guy who's in year 1 with his program versus a guy who might be in year 25 with his program?
Yeah, I would say most yes. Like, when I spoke with Herb Sendak, the coach of Santa Clara, for those who may not know, he was very political in all his answers. It was just like a yes or no. Like, it was a great conversation, but for an extent, I don't want to say it was pulling teeth because, again, it was a very delightful conversation, but, like, you could tell he's a coach's coach that didn't, want to be misquoted, essentially, by someone in the media. While I had a conversation with Chris Gulferson, who's San Fran's coach, and him and I, he's a Philly guy, grew up a Temple fan. I graduated from Temple. So him and I, we talked 30 minutes off the record when we were done conversation, just talking not only about, like, his team and how he's going to replace Jonathan Magbo, but also, just the Philly culture. It was during the MLB playoffs, so we talked about the Phillies a little bit. But yeah, I was definitely able to get more from some of the, like, Coach Riley had a very great conversation with. He was very personable in terms of being willing to go above and beyond to answer my questions and prove, like, he belongs here in terms of, like, that coaches fraternity I talked about. And, like, Coach Smart, he's been coaching in Canada for literally 30-something years. So he was not afraid to, speak either and tell me exactly what I was looking for in a question.
Absolutely. And then let's get into some of the mid-major conferences that you covered for us. Specifically, I want to talk about the SoCon. you put a lot of work into this conference. Your previews are excellent. For those who are a little bit unfamiliar with the SoCon, people who might just be watching high major basketball or might be watching on the West Coast, like, what about a conference like the SoCon, leans into being worth the watch, without giving away too much from your previews? Like, what makes the SoCon worth watching this year?
So my sentiment for the SoCon, I tried reiterating this with all the top teams. I think the SoCon this year is what the Missouri Valley was last year. In terms of, like, the Missouri Valley had Indiana State, who probably should have made the tournament. They ended up going to the NIT championship. They had Drake, who was awesome. And no one talked about how good Bradley was because the other two were so good.
Absolutely. Any preliminary thoughts on just some top teams? I know you right now some teams that you've had top of your projected standings: Wofford, Chattanooga, Furman. Any teams that you feel like could make a push to get a second bid for the SoCon this year?
So I think Chattanooga is the cream of the crop in this conference. I could see, and that doesn't mean they're going to win the conference tournament. Like Samford, yes, last year Samford dominated this conference and honestly should have probably beaten Kansas in the NCAA tournament, but that's a story for another day. Between Chattanooga, Wofford, Samford, East Tennessee State, I could see any of those four teams, and that's before, I don't want to count out Bob Ritchie, who with Furman has been incredible since taking over there. I would say the top two teams are Chattanooga and Wofford. I think those would be the two to answer your question, Sam, of who would be the two to receive an NCAA tournament bid. But I could see an East Tennessee State winning this conference tournament, or Samford winning this conference tournament, and then Chattanooga being the one to get the at-large bid after winning the regular season. Like, that's a very foreseeable situation I could envision.
Yeah. And, if you're a coach in something like the SoCon, I mean, what are the challenges? I mean, obviously everyone's trying to build their program at the same time. They're trying to build a program both to improve the standing of their school and also improve the standing of the conference, so it isn't as cutthroat. So what do you kind of expect out of a lot of the conference games this year? I mean, do you feel like, I guess what I'm asking here is, I mean, what are some key matchups that you feel like are going to be worth watching in the SoCon this year as we get into January, February conference games?
So last year, East Tennessee State ended up making the conference tournament championship as a 7 seed. Mm-hmm. I don't think we're going to see something like that this year because I think the top of the conference is so, I think the top four is so good that you're going to see two of those four in, the conference championship to some extent. But again, I don't want to discredit Furman. UNC Greensboro's been great last few years. Western Carolina, I spoke with Tim Kraft, and he knows he's basically building that team from scratch after Vontarius Woolbright and having basically the best team in program history last year. So I would say I think the top four, even the top five, is going to be very competitive. But after that, I don't see like a whole bunch of upsets outside of those five. I think those five are very handily going to be the five best teams in this conference.
I'm going to put you on the spot. 7 through 10, Mercer, Western Carolina, the Citadel, and VMI. One of them has to bid steal in my scenario here. Who does it?
Ooh.
They make a crazy run in the conference championship game, and they just hit some stupid shot, and they're in. I know.
I would probably say Mercer.
Yeah, that's right there. I got that vibe reading it too. Yep. They're just tough. They're so tough. They're just physical. They're such a physical team every time. So.
And I love the coach from UT Malden, Coach Ritter. I think he's probably the best coach out of those five as well. Again, all phenomenal coaches. Got a chance to speak with multiple of them, but I think he's the one who's the most experienced and most well equipped to be able to, propel his team to a Cinderella run.
From rereading it, the part of the reason I asked the question just as like I wondered where you'd go with the 10 team being included in that. But the VMI might not be 10. They might be better than we think. I'm really impressed with them from rereading things and watching stuff. I wrote the SoCon last year, and Maurice Wright. I think if he takes a step, that's a former top 100 guy for ESPN. I mean, that's not a guy that ends up at VMI very often, if ever. And so if he takes a leap, that team could be really good. So that's just one that I was like, maybe he throws VMI a bone here. You never know. But I'm with you. You have him 10 for a reason. So let's hit the American real quick, and we've got another guest coming up here shortly. I know, Michael, you had to jump. So do you have anything on the American to get us rolling here?
Yeah, no, I apologize. I didn't have to jump. My internet just decided, oh, no, yeah, you just don't need to talk anymore. There's the elephant in the room with the American, but I'd rather start off with UAB. Reading, writing the entire thing with the write about UAB, doing the interview with coaches. Became very clear your player of the year, your Mr. Everything is Yaxel Leidenborg. Just talk about him and how you think he could maybe even potentially lead this UAB team to snagging another tournament bid and winning the American and pulling off a miracle. Not a miracle, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. So Yaxel's actually a guy I interviewed, I'd say 2 months ago, right before I started writing for the magazine. And I was just so impressed with how humble the kid is. Like, he knows he was a JUCO guy, came on the scene last year, coming from a JUCO to basically become Defensive Player of the Year for the conference. And now all of a sudden he's a projected All-American. And I said to him, how quickly did that happen? He goes, I literally was at JUCO. Now all of a sudden I'm a projected All-American. Like, and he has that type of chip on his shoulder with that attitude. Between Lendeberg, between Coleman, I think this team is big. I think they're athletic. And I think that's why they were able to, make that Cinderella run last year and get the auto bid into the NCAA tournament. I was torn when writing this between Memphis and UAB because I could go either way. Like, if you want to tell me UAB is going to win the conference, I'm not going to argue with you. Yeah. Especially with, some of the alleged turmoil apparently going on with Memphis and firing all the coaches. And that's a story for another day. When I just look at Memphis's team on paper, I think PJ Haggerty is the best, I would say, NBA prospect in the conference. He obviously averaged 21 points a game last year for Tulsa as a freshman, was National Freshman of the Year. Tyrese Hunter has big game experience at Iowa State and Texas. So I did end up going with Memphis just because I think sometimes talent does win out. But it wouldn't shock me at all, if UAB is right up there with them, if not better.
Yeah, I love the UAB question to start things out, Michael, because without spoiling any of the answers other than, let's be honest, player of the year, like there's just no one else. Like he's the best player in this conference. But 5 of the 9 total people that were eligible for an award in this, or that were picked for an award, had some affiliation with UAB. Just for context for folks. And they weren't the number 1 team like you just alluded to there. So I'll hit one thing really quick. The strength of the mid-major leagues has really kind of been a big story the last few years, and just kind of, I know Sam loves the question with like the Missouri Valley last year in the A10 and other leagues that were like, we're going to get 4 to 5, or maybe we don't. The Mountain West, obviously, like we've said today, had 6 last year. So it does feel like it just feels really, really extra top heavy. You don't have to give me bracketology talk here, but like, how many teams probably get in from the American?
1.
Really? That is it? Wow. Okay. Yeah. See, I ask it with hesitation only because I think there's maybe 3.
See, I'm higher. I know I didn't write the A10 or the Mountain. I wrote the WCC. I think the A10 is going to get at least 3. I say the Mountain West probably goes from 6 to 2, so maybe that's where 2 of the A10 come. I think the A10 gets more than Mountain West this year. I know you didn't ask for bracketology, and that's sort of what I'm giving.
It's interesting though. I like it though. I like it. The Mountain West thing 6 to 2. I'd have to really go look at it again.
I mean, maybe they get 3, but I don't think they get more than 3 this year.
Okay. That answers my question.
But yeah, I would say 1, and it could be Memphis, could be UAB. I don't know which one, but I would say one of those 2 get in and not both.
Yep. I mean, look, I'm an A10 guy myself, so I'm not. I don't know if I'm bold enough to say that the A10 is going to get more teams in the Mountain West, but I appreciate it. Just coming from someone else. Stephen, thank you again for all the work that you've put into this magazine. Again, we don't want to get into too much detail about your previews because we want people to check it out. The link on the ticker. So make sure you check out some more of Stephen's great writing. But now I want to bring in another one of our great contributors. He did everything for the Sun Belt. He is the Sun Belt Syndicate, Dom Cressetto. Dom, how you doing? So great to have you on here. How excited are you for what's coming in these next 6 days?
Oh, very, very excited. I know that we've all done a lot of work in the background. It took a lot because I've been focusing on football as well. So it was a double duty. But really, really exciting times in the Sun Belt. We had obviously the James Madison run of last year that got a lot of eyes and attention towards this league. And I think we're going to be able to capitalize on that with some further excitement, some new coaches. As you guys have probably already discussed all night long, there's a ton of new rosters that we're going to have to figure out. But parity reigns supreme, and I think in a good way. That should bring some excitement for just about every fan base. I think there's going to be a lot of people that are going to be excited about what the future could hold this season for their team.
I'll let these guys get chopping at the bit. I'll talk to you at the end because I've had you on pods and we've done plenty of pods together, and so I want these guys to get to know you today. But I will say this: it's less of a question, more of a sentiment. I think you kind of started to allude to it there. I shared on the ECB podcast on Sunday the text you sent me about this was the most. I'm paraphrasing. Please correct me when I'm done. The most locked in or the most just juiced you ever felt about the basketball season for the Sun Belt. Not necessarily from last year. You can't get. You might not ever get better than that. 2 20+ 5+ win teams, a 30-win team, upset Michigan State on night one, a NCAA tournament team that wins. It couldn't. You honestly should have had 2 teams in the tournament last year. It's ridiculous. It's crazy to think how good those teams were. My point is just you said it was the most just juiced and just excited you felt about the college basketball season. I know this is obviously a huge labor of love, and when I reached out to you, is obviously from a place of I know what kind of work you can put into something like this. So just kind of talk. We've asked everybody this tonight. We've all talked about it as well, but just talk about the process and just something you maybe surprised you or something you learned as you prepared. What people might not know, maybe somebody who's just not paying attention to something, about 14 teams, a lot of teams for a major conference. It just is. So talk about that process for a minute here, and then we'll get into some of the actual teams and stuff.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that excitement-wise is just, like I said, it really is the parity here. I think you had JMU and App State up there at the top last year. Could they be up there again? Sure, but they could also be in the middle of this conference all of a sudden. There's lots of changes there. You've got a somewhat obvious team, I think, across the board for most people, and for obvious reasons. But then everything else is a total jumble. We were talking about it last night when we did our specific Sun Belt preview, and you could roll a dice and figure out where some of these teams are going to finish. There's all kinds of talent that has come into this league, and from really good teams, and then obviously, like I said, some head coaching changes. So it really just shows that there's nobody that should be down and out at all early. Obviously, it's going to happen. There's going to be a bad team or two, but going in, there should be excitement, and it makes sense to have that across the board. But yeah, looking into this, oh man, I think I've never gone so deep on rosters in the past. I've always just kind of taken it in visually. Obviously looked at stats the next day before we've talked about games, done some little podcast graphics and whatnot, but really and truly looking further into these depth charts and seeing where these guys come from, what kind of numbers they're putting up at JUCO, or a couple of young guys coming up from high school, and how they could fit into these rosters. It's just really exciting. We've got some guys internationally coming into this league. ULM of all teams, which, is one of the, actually, I think it is still the smallest funded D1 athletics program in the country. But they've got a guy from Senegal, and they've got a U18 European Championship from 2003 kid on their roster. So it just seems like, there's some random things that are going to maybe surprise. But yeah, this is, again, it's just exciting because I feel like I'm most knowledgeable I've ever been going into this season at this point.
Yeah. And, I think if that's coming from you, the most knowledgeable you're going into the season, I think anybody who wants to buy this magazine will be pretty knowledgeable going into the season. So again, link on the ticker. But Dom, I wanted to ask you, you alluded to it in that last statement about how these schools have kind of used the transfer portal, specifically at the JUCO level, specifically at the international level. Obviously, the transfer portal has been the dominant recruiting method for so many teams. At the high major level, it's them. It's schools like Alabama. It's schools like in the ACC and the Big East, picking guys from top mid-major schools to make that next step. Obviously, the Sun Belt is a conference that, in a lot of ways, can get poached when they get really good guys on their roster, right, making deep runs. But I'm looking through your previews right now, and in the starting fives, there are guys that there are a lot of transfers in a lot of your projected starting fives. I think in the James Madison one, you have 4 out of 5 of those guys are transfers. So whether it's at the JUCO level or even pulling guys from high major schools that want to, have a more prominent role in taking a step to the mid-major level, how do you feel like schools in the Sun Belt can kind of set the template for a mid-major school's transfer portal philosophy?
Well, that's a great question. Yeah. Well, I think what you're going to have to see is, like you said, the bigger programs, and specifically on the coaching side as well, are grabbing the talented people from this conference. Again, players and coaches are being plucked, and they have to be replaced. So who do you replace them with? Well, you don't necessarily just go and try and grab somebody that's of the same ilk from where you're at, because that's really hard to do, right? The reason some of these kids that are talented left this conference is because they got offered more money, plain and simple. The big, best known secret in the country, right? That these kids are leaving. Look at App State's roster. That was a very specific one last year. I think almost, if not every single kid, entered the transfer portal after the season was over. Now, some of them did come back, but a lot of that happened to be because they were just offered more money after a successful season. That's just what's going to happen. So they have to dig deeper, right? They have to look at the Division II level. They have to look at the NAIA level. We've got 2 kids, a set of twins coming into this conference from Grace College in Indiana. And one of them just went for 19 the other day in a secret scrimmage. So there goes the proof that when you do the right research, you can replace talent with more talent. And it's not going to be the people that everybody expects sometimes. And I think that's what's going to be the big difference maker here. Who has done the research to find the talent in these unknown areas? We've got Pearl City Community College showing up a couple times, Hinds Community College.
A good handful of times, by the way. I was going through your stuff. Like, it was one of the last conferences alphabetically, of course. And so, I thought I mistyped a couple times because I was like, oh, another player from Pearl City, another player from Pearl City. Oh, wow. Okay. And then to your point about Grace College, we just, which is funny, like how connected all of this stuff is. Not the first time Grace College has been brought up on a House of College Hoops show in the last, 48 hours. We had Pat Knight, Bob Knight's son, on Everything College Basketball on Sunday. And I asked him, I said, what makes Indiana basketball so unique? He goes, you know where Grace College is. I was like, so really good. And Marion, where he is, of course. And I was like, yeah, you're right. I was doing research for the Sun Belt and going through your stuff. And I was like, yeah, I do know who Grace College is, because all of their best players, like you just said, ended up in a place like the Sun Belt. So I think it's a really good point.
Yeah. And it's just funny that, you're now finding with this transfer portal guys that, are in California or New York, and they're coming down to this area of the country they probably know nothing about, no familiarity at all, but they're seeing the prospects of what this league could become. You've seen it with football. It's transparent, right? We've got some big brands on the football side in James Madison, App State. Troy's a 2-time champion in football, doing terribly this year, but they'll probably be back here shortly. But can that kind of thing continue into the basketball realm? Again, James Madison, one of the best funded teams in this conference at this point in time. Got some really nice facilities, able to replace a very talented coach with another very talented coach in Spalding from Morehead State. So a lot of excitement, again, still there on that James Madison side. Dustin Kearns returns for App State, even though he was in some conversations apparently for being, taken to the next level as well during the offseason. But yeah, I just think it's just, again, one of those things where you have a little bit of an obvious team towards the top, I'd say, but really and truly all those other ones, all these transfers, it's going to be hard to know exactly how these teams gel. I think that's an important piece as well, right? That's across the board, not just in the Sun Belt, obviously, but it's going to be different styles from across the country trying to come in and learn a system rather quickly and get on pace, because we've seen Georgia Southern last year start off the season 0-12. You can't afford to do that in this. You can't afford to do that in much of any conference, but you definitely can't afford to do it in this conference because you will be left in the dust. So yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of promise for a lot of teams coming in.
Yeah, the Sun Belt obviously had 3 teams total in the general college basketball postseason. You had James Madison in the tournament, the NCAA tournament. You had App State in the NIT, and you had Arkansas State in the CBI. How do you feel like, appearances in the NIT and the CBI could give those schools a little bit of a boost heading into 24-25?
Yeah, I think it's very important for a team like Arkansas State, who came together a lot more towards the end of last season under first-year head coach Hodgkin, and really make a push into this season. And again, no secrets at this point now that's probably your odds-on favorite to take this thing, and we'll get into more specifics here, I'm sure, about that one. But yeah, for other teams, I think at the mid-major level across the board, specifically the Sun Belt, where attendance, and we just got to tell the truth here, it's not great, right? Hopefully a lot of people are taking in, the ESPN Plus coverage. Hopefully they're taking in some of our podcasts to kind of keep themselves up to speed, even if they're not able to watch every single game every night. But yeah, you've got to have some success there. And hopefully some of that success comes on your home court where you can further develop that fan base, get those students excited, because we saw it last year. App State hasn't packed the house out for basketball in many, many years, but they did it a few times last season. And one of those times they beat Auburn, and the other time they beat the conference favorite JMU. So it makes a massive difference, and it's got to be, locals as well, right? These students can't fill up these stadiums by themselves, but if they can continue to build the fan bases, that's what's going to build the brand like Sunbelt needs to be built, just like they have for football. Very successful in attendance across the league. It needs to happen in the basketball at this point in time.
Yeah, you touched on Arkansas State and Coach Hodgson, who is really recruiting at a high level. He brought in a couple really key transfers, and then he brings in the highest rated recruit in program history. Just talk about how you came to the conclusion of Arkansas State being a top tier team in this league, and how you think Coach Hodgson going forward is going to take where he's able to take this program.
Yeah, he came in with some experience at some good levels, and then he's brought in what his knowledge base was from the recruiting from those schools and brought it into Arkansas State. Arkansas State has been pretty decent in basketball in the past, but they'd had some recently down years, and that's why he ended up there, obviously, because they were looking for a new head man. But the biggest aspect is he kept the core and the nucleus of that team together. Once again, this Arkansas State probably surprisingly might have the most money as far as basketball is concerned in this conference, at least a donor base that is excited about basketball and willing to maybe pay some players to keep them around as far as the NIL aspect is concerned. We've seen it happen at the main school in that state. In Arkansas, apparently there might be some backdoor goings-ons to help Arkansas State as well, even from maybe the same person, but or at least the same family, I should say. But the interesting aspect is that then they keep their strong core and nucleus together from a team that went on that run towards the end of last season, end up in the Sun Belt Conference Championship game against James Madison. They're a hot 3-point shooting team. And then they just go and add one of the best players already in the conference from Louisiana in Kobe Julian, who's now additional to that roster and just completely solidified their top 5 without any question. But they've also got a ton of depth on that team. So they're going to be able to go 5 strong right off the bat and then continue to throw it at you throughout the game. And if they're shooting hot from 3, they are going to be very, very difficult to beat this season.
Absolutely. Dom, you alluded to something else that I kind of wanted to hit on before we move on to our final segment. You talk about just a big challenge for schools in the Sun Belt is just trying to sell tickets, right? Trying to fill stadiums. Being a mostly, Southeastern, concentrated conference, and, being a mid-major, there's a good chance that a lot of the schools and a lot of the students at these schools, they might grow up fans of another program, and then they just go to the school. Like in Arkansas, somebody at Arkansas State might grow up a Razorbacks fan their whole life. Someone at Marshall might grow up a West Virginia fan their whole life. So, I've seen it too at when I went to Fordham, I see people walking around with jerseys for other schools. I see, someone walking around with a Chris Paul Wake Forest jersey, whether or not they're a fan or not, I don't know. But how do you feel like how do you feel like these programs kind of take that as a challenge to kind of grow their fan base? And what are some ways that you've seen schools in the Sun Belt navigate that and then flip those, maybe lifelong Arkansas fans into lifelong Arkansas State fans, to truly rep their school and their eventual alma mater?
Yeah, I do agree with you. It's a very challenging thing for teams like App State, James Madison, ODU, Coastal Carolina, being close to the Triangle area of North Carolina, where those programs like NC State and UNC and Duke really, really translate really nationally for all three of those, but certainly in the region. You see those jerseys on campus. I know I spent time in Boone where I met my wife, so I spent a lot of time there, and it didn't matter who App State was playing or where they were playing. No one was asking for that on TV when the Duke-Carolina matchup was on. So there are massive obstacles, as you say. We'll go with the first and most obvious answer. Winning takes care of that, right? There's tons of people in the James Madison, Harrisonburg, Virginia area who probably cared much more about Virginia basketball and the run that they've been on most recently. But look what JMU was able to do last year. I bet you most of those people who kind of split the difference were leaning heavily in one way. Same thing with App State. Obviously, you're not going to displace Duke and NC State and UNC, but they were up there in the conversation for the first time in a very, very long time with, possibly being an outside a bubble team, just outside, unfortunately, for those of us Mountaineer fans. But yeah, they've got to do little things, because the second easiest option you can have is to spend more money to make things happen. But you could throw all the money in the world at it. You still have to have a little bit of success and a little bit of excitement. I've seen some things as, bringing in somebody exciting to kind of perform at halftime, T-shirt giveaways, come to the game, we'll give you all a slice of pizza. Sometimes the silly things work. It's college, right? Make it a fun atmosphere to go at. I just saw it again this weekend at App State, right? They had the Hurricane Helene. The football team was going back for the first time in a very long time. And I didn't know what the atmosphere was going to be like. Those students came and packed the hill. Why? It's not because App State's doing great in football this year. They're not. It's because it's a fun culture and an atmosphere that they want to be a part of. Obviously that's a little different, outside versus inside for basketball, and it's colder and especially in the App State region, the Harrisonburg, Virginia, West Virginia with Marshall, those areas get a lot colder in the wintertime. And so it's got to be something that's a little bit spark of the interest. And then once they're there, you got to get them to have some fun. And obviously a lot of that goes on the court, but you've got to have it happen in other aspects too. Maybe cheap concessions, maybe some kind of silly promotion that, again, it's like a college-based thing. Because the locals will come every once in a while. Can't be priced too high, but those are the kind of things they need to continue doing to grow these fan bases. Because you're right, a lot of these kids, if they're not growing up with it, it's kind of a thought process that they don't have. So you got to get them early as well. So we'll see if they can start capitalizing on that stuff.
I mean, this short and sweet would be like, just do what JMU's doing, but like the whole thing, like all of it's great. And then you go, you threw in the part about winning. And that's literally the hardest part of this conversation is I'm glad that you elaborated on, well, okay, how did they get there? Right. They were not the infancy of James Madison, at least at this high level. I don't think people understand, like this isn't a team that's been in the Sun Belt for like 900 years and a legacy or whatever. And look at 26,000 people showed up. I may have the number a little off, but 26,000 people showed up to College Game Day. I know this is football we're talking about for a second, but like not the game, the College Game Day set. They should 26,000 people showed up to that. And then I don't know, a month later, their basketball, or like, I think it was the same month they beat Michigan State. And then 2 months later, they're in the NCAA tournament. It's like that stuff obviously is going to propel that. And you don't get a Byington from Vanderbilt without that success. You just don't. But I will give you this credit. Like, I know you mentioned the App State stuff, and like, I'll just tell a quick story to kind of, less of a question, just more of a great way to like kind of encapsulate everything you said, is places like App State that are legacy schools, especially in the Sun Belt, or at least Southern schools that are just legacy that football's always reigned supreme. There is a blend of whatever they're doing right. They're at least keeping the people that are around. Like, I went to a game last year. I wasn't with you, unfortunately, but like I'll just tell the quick story real quick. I said, hey, I know one guy that can get me an App State ticket. It was against Auburn. I was like, I'm not paying what the get in was for that. I'm just not. Right? I'm a media person. I wasn't able to line up things in time. So I called you and I said, I need a ticket. I need the best way you can get it to me. And in a long story short way, I got it from a message board from a guy that graduated in 1975. Okay, like there are things like that are out there in the Sun Belt that people are doing. Like App State does a really good job of keeping those people either in the area or, hey, I know the team was the best team they've had really probably since the 80s, right? I'd have to look at the records again. But the point is like you mentioned the winning, those fans are there whether they're winning or not. So whatever they're doing, whatever the James Madisons of the world are doing, whatever App States are doing, I was really, really impressed with the atmosphere because they weren't this, that Auburn game was in December last year. They weren't 27 and whatever last year at that point. So they were still getting to that point. They were getting better. I saw signs they were going to be a really good team. And I texted you that after. I'm like, this is a really good team. You can probably find them. I didn't think they were 27 and whatever. And they were going to be, probably the NCAA tournament team at the time. And so whatever they're doing, I was just really impressed with the atmosphere. And I've been in a couple of the Sun Belt buildings now. I think the arrow is pointing up. It's just like I said, how you elaborated there, whether it's all the silly stuff or not. It's just like these teams just have to keep winning, even if it's with the Pearl Cities of the world, even if it's with the transfers from a high major program down and trying to get the best out of those guys. It's going to be a lot. And obviously we've seen mid-major leagues turning around where some of these mid-major leagues we talk about at the highest level now were embarrassments 10 years ago.
Yeah.
So I think the Sun Belt can get there.
Yeah.
Dom, thank you so much for coming on. Where can we find, we can find a lot of your work in the ECB magazine, but throughout the season, where can we find your coverage for everything Sun Belt?
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate that very much, by the way. The magazine is the best part because if you're like me, it's a visual thing. I can hear it all day, but I got to remember something, I've got to read it. And that's not even like a promotion for the magazine. It's literally how I operate. I need to read it and need to go into the brain instead of just hearing it. But if you also enjoy the audio video aspect, we do a weekly podcast specifically for football, basketball, and baseball throughout the year. And you can find us at Sun Belt Syndicate across pretty much every social platform. The only one that's any different is Twitter or X, I guess now. We couldn't fit the E on the end, so it's Syndicate. But we do not have a cat as a mascot. So
I love it.
That's great. Thank you so much, Dom. Hopefully we'll see you down the road this season.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys.
All right, guys. That's the bulk of our show. But before we wrap up, I just kind of wanted to go around the horn here. Again, the three of us, as well as Josh Burton, Jake Zimmer, Will Tondo, Peyton as well. We all put a lot of hours in this. We put a lot of time, put a lot of effort. I just want, and no matter what, throughout our writing, throughout the researching, throughout the editing, I feel like as I was doing all those things, I was also just still learning so much about this year's college basketball landscape. They were names that I haven't heard in like 2-3 years that I saw popping up in the WAC, and coaches moving around that I totally forgot about popping up in the SoCon. So for you guys, I kind of want to go around and just think, while you were going through this magazine, whether or not through your own writing or looking at the writing of somebody else and reading it after we released the magazine, what was something that kind of was really eye-opening to you about something in this year's college basketball landscape?
I got a couple, so I'm going to start off. This is definitely with the smaller conferences I cover. This is definitely main charactering here a bit. Number one, I wrote my Morgan State preview before their official roster came out because with MEAC, SWAC teams, it was the rosters were coming out with a lot of the low major teams. They were coming out kind of later, so I wrote the majority of what I was going to say. I wasn't fine-tuned or anything, but my rough draft was done. Then they released their roster. Winston Tabbs is back for his 15th season of college basketball. I remember his freshman season at Boston College where he was a starter and a legitimate 12 points per game type guy. He's back again. And that's an impact player that completely changed the way I ended up writing about the MEAC. That was one. Another one was in the SWAC. Florida A&M hired a coach named Patrick Crary. He is the entire league, one downside of it is why you're really never going to see them beat a ton of high major teams. You're just not going to. It's because the entire league really can't shoot. His entire philosophy is very analytical mind. It's like, yeah, we're going to pull up for three in transition, no problem. We're going to just take a ton of threes, and we're going to try to get to the rim, whatever. And I'm just kind of interested to see how that approach works in a league that's really just built on toughness. So I think those were kind of two of my interesting takeaways, especially because I found out the other day that Crary, like the hiring of him, he was originally signed for a 3-year contract. Now he's here for just a year, and it's like, wait, how does that affect his recruiting, affect this, that? Who knows how that goes? But those are two interesting notes from some of the lower conferences that I covered.
Wait a minute. We're not just going to breeze past that. This is his first. I'm not going to scroll to the bottom of the SWAC for a second here. This is his first year with the program.
His first year, Patrick Crary, is his first year with Florida A&M, and he was with a Florida Memorial NAIA type school.
And they went from 3-year to now 1 year.
Yeah, so he had a 3-year contract originally. Then it was like some of the players on the team might have been told they can't come, and then the board was like, "Wait, whoa, what's going on here? What is going on with this guy?" And then like a month later, it's like, all right, he's getting paid the same amount per year, but yeah, now he's only on contract for a year rather than 3.
I hope they win the league now, and they have like this weird situation like Long Beach State had last year, where they fired with Monson or whatever, right? And they were like, "Oh, by the way, we're in the tournament." Yeah, that was awkward. That was probably one of the weirdest breakups ever, I would say. I can't think of many others. Okay, so Noah Farkanen, he's still playing college basketball. I think I texted you guys this in the group. I covered the CAA ad nauseum, right? 12 months a year. And I like found that out on the fly as I was putting things together. Like I like follow everything, and I still was like, oh yeah, Noah Farkanen is playing for his last year of eligibility, maybe. For Ivan Thomas, who's a first-year head coach. There's just a lot. The Hampton thing, everyone's picking him last. The whole just the Hampton idea is just really confusing for me. I'm going in the weeds here, and this is why you talked about the SWAC, so I feel like I'm fair game here. But they're predicted 14th in the preseason poll. Hampton is, but they also have a first-team player. They literally have a first-team voted player. I don't know if that's ever happened, like ever, like in any conference. I'd be shocked. Maybe someone can just throw out an example that's happened this year or last year or whatever. But that was an interesting one. Just that whole league as a whole. It's kind of like the Sun Belt, right? It's got these maybe some power players, but then it's also like there's like 9 teams that could just like kill everybody every night. I could give you more. SMU has a guy that's still playing college basketball that really surprised me. I can't get the roster pulled up fast enough. I would say overall, I don't want to give you this like sappy answer and say it's the parity, but like I have no idea who's actually really going to win anything. And I've spent the last 6 months working on this. And so have you. And so have you. And so like, I know that's kind of a loaded statement because we literally, you can only predict these things and find out if you're wrong. But like, even the ones I'm like the most confident in, I genuinely don't even believe my own opinion in some of these cases because it's that much parity. It's really interesting.
The most interesting part is kind of figuring out how and why we're wrong. I kind of think that's the most interesting part. It's like, okay, we did all this research. Here's what we found. How is this team this much better? Is it just because this kid took a jump, or is it because this transfer profiled really well? Is it because we didn't see how good this team was going to be defensively? Is it because whatever reason it is? I kind of think that's the most interesting part. Like I was making lists that I'm going to end up tweeting out of like, all right, these are who I think are the top 10 transfers in the Big East, top 10 freshmen, whatever. And it's like, okay, I have these guys. I'm just kind of interested in more or less seeing, are these guys as good as I think they will? Does this player hit his potential? Does this player not hit his potential? Just kind of seeing how I'm wrong. That's kind of the most interesting part. But at the same time, it's like, I've done all the research. Here are the teams you need to watch out for. Here's what I'm looking for. And if this comes to fruition, I'm going to take a victory lap.
I'm about to say this, and this is not to pick on Josh. I've made this analogy before. I think when we pitched this to you guys, this was the analogy we used of like that. Your whole point in the last minute is like how fun it is to find out if you're going to be wrong or not. I know he's not here to defend himself. There are more examples. There are hundreds of them last year. But South Carolina, he predicted them to be dead DFL, like dead last in the SEC. They made the NCAA tournament, and they were a top 5 team in the SEC. Yeah. Like, why? I'm not putting you on the spot and saying, why do you think South Carolina was 14th to 5th or whatever, right? But, like, there has to be a clear answer that we can look at, right? Like, maybe you guys are prepared on this answer, but, like, there has to be a clear answer of like, I know they had some incredible players and they played incredible
Colin
defense,
Boyle.
and right. There's answers that maybe we just kind of got to there, but like, he's really good at what he does, and I'm still really confused why he was wrong.
Yeah,
like I just and we're a year removed.
I mean, I think it's the same answer for why anybody is wrong with any prediction, right? It's like any statistic, any ranking, any projection. Like, I mean, even stuff when you get into, some really deep statistics like KenPom or the net rating, or even like if you want to go into college football, like the Collie matrix, like all of that stuff and all of the research that we've done. While I think we did a great job, pat ourselves in the back here, but
yes.
Well, I think we put a lot of work into it. It's all what has happened, right? It's none of it is based on what's yet to come because we just don't know. So I think with college basketball, like it's any team can flip a switch, right? Like you talk about the Long Beach State situation. I mean, if you want to go back to like the A-10 like 3 seasons ago,
sure.
I feel like we almost witnessed a Long Beach State situation in Coach Matt McCall with UMass, right? He gets fired on March 2nd after a win against Fordham. Well, they had lost 3 games prior, and they were 5-11 in conference play going into that game. But still, they win the last 2 games of the regular season. Then they beat George Washington in the second round of the A-10 tournament that year, and only lose by 3 points to Dayton in the quarterfinal. And then the team that won the tournament that year was Richmond, who took down Davidson, and Richmond was the 6th seed. So it's like strange things happen. College basketball is really strange. The team that you're wearing on your head right now. I mean, who had any thought about NC State? Well, you did, but
I'm being humble here. I really thought they could make a Sweet 16 run.
Yeah,
I'm like 2 games off. Okay, like let's be real, that's not that far away.
But again, right? Like you thought their ceiling was a Sweet 16, and they went even further. So again, it's all guesswork. It's well informed guesswork, but it's at the end of the day, like once that ball's tipped, like it could go anyway.
Literally none of it matters until March 1st, basically.
My one thing that surprised me, kind of in the same vein, just to finish this up, was in the same vein of thinking like, oh my god, like this guy's still around. Oh my god, this guy went here. One that got me like kind of really excited is Jameer Brickus at Villanova. He is a guy that I've watched in the A-10 for a long time at LaSalle. He was under Fran Dunphy. Him and Khalil Brantley were this pair of 2 fantastic guards at LaSalle. They just balled out every year in the Atlantic 10 tournament. They were so fun to watch. I love that he's staying in the city of Philadelphia. I think that's really fun. For anybody who's not, around the East Coast or the Northeast, I mean, Big 5 hoops is so fun, so contentious.
Yeah.
Just the fan bases are excellent. They really get behind it. They really care about that inter-Philly matchup there. So
shout out to the Big 5 for actually making it. I know it makes it the Big 6, but like Drexel, okay, like the fact really, like we're really not thinking them as a Philly team till last year.
Yeah, well, the Big 10 has 18 teams, so I think we can give the Big 5.
Did you realize that this probably, but off the top of your head, but like I was doing research for a trivia question for Trivia Showdown for my show, and Drexel was not officially recognized as a Big 5 school until last season.
Yeah.
And they beat Villanova.
So disrespectful. Are you kidding me? Like it just anyway. I know it's not a national championship, but like this is ridiculous. Like
I gotta get back to you on the reasoning for that because I truly don't know. Like again, like I think the Big 5 is super fun. I'm not a Philly guy, so like I'm not really super well versed in it. But I would love to do a little research into why Drexel was excluded for so long.
Reason. Like it's crazy.
Yeah, it is really weird because then they were part of, like there was a designation for all 6 of them. They were like there is like people have floated around the term like City 6, but
they probably just can't call it it. It was probably just a naming rights thing for so long. They were like, this is dumb. We're sticking to this, and they probably just did.
Yeah, really
Matt Cross, by the way, that name I've messed with me. I finally found it. Matt Cross, literally just talking about A-10. I'll bring this full circle. Matt Cross has now played for 3 ACC teams: Miami, Louisville, and SMU.
SMU noted ACC team.
Yeah, exactly. No, again, and Matt Cross
Glad
is
y'all put that
another
on.
example, right? Like you're doing the research and you're like, oh my god, like hello, Matt Cross. It's good.
I laughed out loud. Like I'll never forget it. I was sitting in this chair and I started their preliminary, like, okay, gonna watch a couple guys. I was really familiar with them last year because I really liked them as they made the run. A couple people told me they probably were a sleeper. They returned some of those guys, and I'm really excited about them. And then I'm like, I went, Matt Cross plays for SMU. And like I said it out loud. I was like, okay, sick. So
Yeah.
anyway,
He's a baller.
what a way to end the podcast at 1:30 there, Matt Cross.
So yeah, that guy, guys, that's gonna do it for our show. This has been the preview, or just kind of a general discussion around the 2024-25 Everything College Basketball Magazine presented by House of College Hoops. You can get it down at the link over here. If you're checking out, if you're scrolling around house-enterprise.com, which you should be all the time because we're always putting out some great content that's only going to ramp up starting next week with college basketball season right around the corner. We'll have a link for you always at the ready on the blog. It's here. We're so excited. We're so excited to give you everything that we've researched, everything that we've written and edited over the summer to you, the fan base. Because I've said this every time this magazine is bought, I send it out personally to everyone who buys it, and I've said in every single email, college basketball is built on the community. It's built by the fans. It's built for the fans. And so I think this magazine is really our love letter to the fans, because that's no matter what, no matter where we are in this media landscape, like that's where we've all started. So I think this is kind of the culmination of that. So if you have the time, if you got the cash, check it out. Would really appreciate it. Throughout the season, make sure you're checking out House of College Hoops on Twitter at College Hoops HE. Make sure you're checking out Road to the Garden as well as the ECB podcast. Make sure you're heading to house-enterprise/the blog for game stories, interviews, podcasts, everything under the sun. And so for Trevor Everett, Michael DeRosa, I'm Sam Basil. This has been the House of College Hoops, and we'll see you guys next time.